Greetings, sci-fi fans. It looks like we're out here on the porch again, at night, so you know what that means. It's time for some sci-fi analysis. I don't know what it is about the porch that lends itself to sci-fi analysis. I somehow just feel more at ease out here. Maybe it's the space is in view and I can see the stars and shit from my position. It just feels like sci-fi time. So today we're talking about one of the most interesting sci-fi film franchises, that being the Star Trek film franchise, which is interesting because it's kind of bad. Like, half of it is pretty crap, and I think that's interesting, mainly just because I don't think Star Trek works good as movies. I think it does work best, first and foremost, as episodic or semi-serialized in the case of DS9, I guess. Episodic or semi-serialized TV storytelling. It doesn't really work as standalone big-budget feature films, but they tried anyway throughout the course of Star Trek's run. And I would argue that, as of right now, Star Trek as an intellectual property and a film franchise is pretty dead. Not only because it doesn't really work as movies, not only because both casts of the good Star Trek are like way beyond being in any of this shit anymore, but also because there's the unfair accusation that's made that Star Trek is like harder to understand than Star Wars, which is not really true. Like, Star Wars has arguably a more convoluted, messy universe than Star Trek does. It's just that a lot of people don't have the attention span necessary to watch the entirety of TNG or DS9, so they're not going to get all the great writing that goes into Star Trek at its best. So there isn't too much of a die-hard, crazy Star Trek fan base these days. It's kind of gone down in popularity, and I don't think there's going to be any movie that, like, really creates a huge amount of interest in Star Trek ever again. I think Star Trek as an intellectual property is pretty much dead. So these movies serve as kind of time capsules of a bygone era, so they're interesting in that regard too. I've decided for the purposes of this video that the best way to analyze these is a straightforward list from worst all the way up to best, and you might not be surprised by my picks here if you've seen any of my previous videos about Star Trek movies, but if you haven't, you're probably going to be surprised by how I rank these, but this is just how I rank them because I tend to have unique opinions like this, so, you know, you might be seriously offended by how I rank these. Fair warning. At number 11, I hesitated to even put this on the list, but just all of the fucking Kelvin verse.
He killed Pike. He almost killed you, and now you think it's a good idea to pop open a torpedo.
This is like one of the most baffling decisions that's ever been made, like, period. I have no idea what the fuck J.J. Abrams was thinking. I can't even sort Self-Titled and Into Darkness and Beyond from worst to best as, like, individual movies because it's just a heaping dumpster fire of convoluted trash. What I find really funny about these movies is, like, J.J. Abrams is making them. He was like, oh, we want to respect it, so instead of making it a reboot, we're going to make it so that it's like an alternate universe, and the original Star Trek universe still exists. And it's like, well, JJ, it's inherently just disrespectful to just make Star Trek and just replace all the characters everyone knows and loves with these fake-ass, goofy fucking lookalikes that don't even look like the characters and don't even act like the characters. Who the fuck wants to watch fake Kirk and fake Spock in fake Star Trek universe when you could just watch actual Kirk and actual Spock in the actual Star Trek universe? What would be respectful to the legacy of Star Trek is to create a brand new show with characters as well written as the ones in Next Generation, like how the Next Generation did when TOS cast was getting tired of playing Kirk and Spock and McCoy, so they're like, let's make new characters that are great and people like. Would have done the same thing for like a new era of Star Trek that breathes new, fresh life into the series, but instead they were like, no, we'll just pretend like it's original Star Trek, but it's like fake ass Star Trek. And it's like, who can even enjoy the thrilling adventures of Kirk and Spock and McCoy? What is even the point of making this new fake version when it's just like a self-contained 2-hour movie that can't even recapture the wonderful writing and set design and everything that made the original series so great? Who the fuck thought this was a good idea? And I don't know who the fuck is a fan of the fucking Kelvinverse. Like, I assume they exist somewhere, but I have yet to see anyone who actually, like, makes the argument that the Kelvinverse is competent or like, good. And these movies are pure trash. In many ways, they're worse than the Star Wars movies, because at least, like, the Star Wars movies from J.J. Abrams feel like Star Wars, because, you know, Star Wars has always been movies, but this doesn't feel jack shit like Star Trek. It just completely rips the universe to shreds. It just fucks the continuity all up, just fucks the entire franchise up. This was the death of Star Trek. This was when you saw it and you were like, oh yeah, Star Trek's gone. There's never going to be a good Star Trek again. So, yeah. At number 10, we got Wrath of Khan. You know, I have to rank Wrath of Khan as the worst, like, actual Star Trek movie. Wrath of Khan is fucking shit. I don't know who the hell thinks Wrath of Khan is, like, a good sequel, much less to the motion picture. That's like saying The Rage Carrie 2 is better than Carrie. That's fucking ludicrous. It's a terrible sequel. Ricardo Montalban just seems so fucking bored in it. The set design sucks, the costumes suck, the plot is boring as frick. There's that whole drawn-out sequence where Chekhov gets the fucking bug in his ear, and it's just like needlessly, gratuitously, like, body horror, I guess, is what they're going for. It's fucking stupid. I don't hate Ricardo Montalban. He's actually in some good shit. Like, Fantasy Island is great. He's really good in The Naked Gun. He plays off Leslie Nielsen really, really well. Khan, as a character, just fucking sucks. And even a great actor like Ricardo Montalban cannot make Khan a compelling character. After you get villains, like, as competent, as good as, like, Wei-Yun or Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, you get episodes like Waltz that are just, like, deep, introspective character studies into the mind of this fantastic antagonist. Like Sisko and Dukat on that planet, it's so fucking cool to see how these characters interact. And that's, like, the best fucking villain in Star Trek, hands down. Dukat. Wonderful, wonderfully written antagonist. Khan is shit. Khan is the worst villain in Star Trek, hands down. His motives are stupid. His backstory doesn't make any sense because it's like in this alternate version of the 90s, and then in Star Trek Voyager they go back to the 90s and it's just like the normal 90s and the eugenics wars didn't happen, even though Voyager is set in the same continuity as TOS, so the eugenics wars would have happened. It's, yeah, like, his backstory doesn't make any fucking sense because he's from the 90s, even though, you know, obviously there weren't, like, fucking genetically augmented people in the 90s. Khan is stupid because he's just a big, strong guy, and he just randomly hates Kirk for no fucking reason. They just randomly find him. He has no personal connection to Kirk. He's not, like, the opposite of Kirk or anything. It's not like, you know, Batman and the Joker, where, like, the antagonist is representative of themes that are the opposite of the protagonist. It's literally just like this random, evil, strong guy who's just purely evil because he's genetically designed to be evil. Fucking pathetic character. The conflict between him and Kirk is just, like, stupid. You know, in a series as groundbreaking as the original Star Trek, when you got characters like Dr. Roger Corby and shit, and, like, crazy good antagonists, Mudd is a way fucking crazier, better antagonist than fucking Khan. I'd watch a movie with Mudd any fucking day. 2 hours of hardcore Fenton Mudd action, I'd go for that. Khan fucking sucks. Then there's the end where Spock dies, and it's like, that's the most bummer fucking way to end a Star Trek movie. You just fucking kill off one of the most beloved characters. So everyone exits the theater after Wrath of Khan just thinking, like, oh shit, well, you know, fuck this. I don't like Star Trek anymore because it's just not going to have Spock from now on. It's basically like if Luke Skywalker just fucking died at the end of Empire Strikes Back, right? You wouldn't have any reason to keep watching because he's like the best character. And then they just bring him back and Search for Spock. But more on that when I get to Search for Spock, which is only slightly better than Wrath of Khan. But Wrath of Khan is really just the bottom of the barrel in terms of just like emotional manipulation. Oh, we killed Spock off at the end, and then Khan fucking sucks. The plot is boring. It's just a rehash of Space Seed where Khan just, oh, I'm evil. Oh, I'm big and strong, and I'm evil and big and strong, and I hate Kirk. Grr, I hate that Kirk with every fiber of my being for no actual reason because I'm the only one who, puts myself in these scenarios where Kirk has to take me down. Oh, dang. Khan, God, what a fucking poorly written character. And it's such a shame. Like, Star Trek has so many great villains, and I could list them for hours. Yeah, Wrath of Khan it just fucking sucks. It's the worst actual Star Trek movie, the worst Star Trek movie with the original cast, hands down, and it's the point where the Star Trek movies started really being shit. Okay, moving on, we got Final Frontier.
Why is God angry?
Pretty obvious pick. Nobody I've ever asked has ever said Final Frontier is their favorite or anything. I think part of it, I hate to admit this, William Shatner isn't good at writing. He's not generally like that ideologically nifty, and, it really shows. The script to this one's really weak. The plot barely makes any sense. Shatner's a great actor, but he's not a good screenwriter, and he was given complete creative control of this one, and it's just really boring. And, it's supposed to be like the craziest adventure that Star Trek has ever been on. Wow, they're going to find God. But then, like, it's just not God, it's just some alien. I don't know, the part where they're camping is kind of cute. It's kind of like, oh, they're just taking a nice little camping journey on Earth, that's kind of nice and everything. And you can tell William Shatner is just, like, very sentimental at this point in his career and just kind of wanted to make a fun little nugget of deep-fried nostalgia. Yeah, this one's fucking weak. It really just goes to show how low the series had gotten at this point. This one doesn't feel like a great adventure or anything at all. It's just like, oh, let's find God. And then Kirk's like a wise ass, and he's like, what does God want with a starship? That line, as far as I can tell, has kind of been memed to oblivion, because it's just like, yeah, really, what does God want with the fucking Enterprise, It's fucking stupid. Same idea's been done, like, much better, like that episode where Barclay gets all smart in Next Generation, and, like, they find the godlike entity or whatever. That one's pretty damn good. I mean, it's just a great example, again, of how, like, there's so many episodes of TNG and TOS and DS9 that are just so much more well-written than these movies, and do a much better job than these movies conceptually, and communicate much higher ideas. So the whole bit about, like, traveling through the center of the galaxy kind of just reminds me of that episode, By Any Other Name, where they travel through the edge of the galaxy. And, it just doesn't make any sense, really, because, like, there's just a big black hole at the middle of the Milky Way. Like, we know that, so they just get sucked in. So, the whole idea of the movie just is, like, fucking nonsense on the face of it. Okay, up next we got The Search for Spock.
You're gonna sit in the closet.
The closet? What, have you lost all your sense of reality?
Holy fuck, what a boring-ass waste of a movie. At least it's not Wrath of Khan, where the conflict is complete nonsense and the antagonist and protagonist don't make any sense. Search for Spock is just a movie with barely any fucking conflict. It's literally just 2 hours spent reviving Spock, bringing him back to life, and I don't know whether or not this was the plan from the get-go, but, like, just why kill off Spock if you're just immediately going to bring him back? That seems like such a cheap gimmick. It's just like, oh, we killed him, but, yep, brought him back. And this idea where, characters are killed and then instantly brought back, so it's like there's no consequences, that's criticized like anywhere else, so why the fuck aren't we calling it out in Star Trek and just saying, you know, this is a cheap emotional manipulation ploy that's just trying to get us to get sad about Spock dying, and then they just fucking bring him back to life in the next fucking movie. But really, they don't bring him back to life, because it's just a clone. It's like a Spock clone. So, from that point on, the Spock that we're watching in all the rest of the movies is actually just like a clone of Spock, which is fucking weird to think about. You know, the movie jumps through all these hurdles to go like, oh, well, actually, it's Spock. He's just like original Spock. He's just the same. Man, he's original Spock. But, you know, he's not. He's a clone of Spock. And it would have been cooler if, like, they time traveled back, you know, and Kirk, like, grabs Spock at the last minute, saves him or something. That'd be kind of cool. But no, they go with fucking cloning. Like, it doesn't even make any sense, because the whole point of Khan to begin with is, like, a character is, like, you know, eugenics and genetic manipulation is bad. Like, in the Star Trek universe, that's, like, frowned upon, you know, to be an augment, as they call it. So then, like, they're just like, oh yeah, but cloning's A-okay, let's just clone an entire fucking planet and just grow a malformed Spock clone on this planet, and that's A-okay, you know, just because we gotta have Spock back. Yeah, this movie's fucking lame as shit, and this is the part in Star Trek where it's just like this weird-ass middle ground between TOS and TNG. The aesthetic is all fucked up, and it has no idea what it wants to be. Is it Star Trek? Is it old Star Trek? Is it new Star Trek? No, it's this weird in-between zone where it's like a fucking Genesis music video. I just get fucking Phil Collins vibes while watching Search for Spock. It's freaking weird. It's just like this 80s watered-down version of what Star Trek had been. And the fact that they take an entire movie just to undo the effects of the previous movie just shows how, like, piss poor the writing of these things is compared to the shows. At 7, we got the last Star Trek movie with the original cast, Undiscovered Country.
Punishment means exile from prison to the surface.
This one is not quite as bad as Final Frontier or Search for Spock, and I think, for what it's worth, it's kind of nice that they got to redeem themselves even a little bit after Final Frontier. Like, this is undoubtedly slightly better than Final Frontier, but it's still really scraping the bottom of the barrel. The plot is boring as fuck, arguably even more boring than Final Frontier. It's just Spock and Kirk are framed for a murder they didn't commit, and then they go to jail. Wow, so exciting. And then they just spend most of the movie, like, in a fucking prison colony. And it's like, what happened to the franchise where Kirk would fight off a fucking Gorn, you know? What happened to the franchise with fucking Horta and all that wild shit, you know? What happened to Balance of Terror? What happened to the Tholian Web? What happened to the action? What happened to the spectacle and the excitement and the fun? You know, where'd the fun in this franchise go? Undiscovered Country is just, like, fucking depressing. I mean, I guess it has a nice happy ending where, you know, they're found innocent of this murder they didn't commit. It's basically just like The Fugitive. It was fucking lame. Like, the big send-off to Kirk and Spock and McCoy and everyone is just like, yeah, let's just send them to fucking Guantanamo Bay, the space version, and then they have to escape. Like, what a sad way to end off these characters, you know? Like, I think Final Frontier tries to make it way too spectacular, way too big scale, like, let's go find God. And then Undiscovered Country tries for this, like, really low-key, understated, like, thriller angle. And neither approach works. You should just give these characters, like, a fun space adventure. That's what Star Trek is supposed to be. It doesn't need to be like this hotbed of political intrigue or anything. Props to Undiscovered Country. It does try to, like, kind of bridge original Star Trek and Next Generation, and Michael Dorn is in at one point, so that's a nice little cameo. That's a nice little bit. I like the idea that Worf's grandpa is in this, And it does a nice job of kind of bridging the old Klingons and the new Klingons in a sort of way. And I like whenever Klingon lore is kind of developed, so there is that. But yeah, this movie's just fucking depressing. It's fucking sad. And yeah, not worth a watch, I would say. I wouldn't recommend it. At 6, we have the weakest of the Next Generation movies, Insurrection.
We're approaching your position. Do you need assistance?
May need a lift in a minute or so.
Insurrection is a pretty dang weird movie. A lot of people say it just feels like an extended episode of TNG, which is okay. I don't really mind there being, like, you know, just kind of a side adventure that for whatever reason happens to be a movie. The reason this movie feels so incomplete, at least part of why it feels so incomplete, is because a ton of it was cut. And apparently there was supposed to be a scene with Quark from DS9, and that would have been fucking epic, you know, to see Quark on the big screen. That would have been fucking cool. That might have actually bumped this movie up a notch if Quark was in it. But for what it's worth, it's a pretty decent little TNG adventure, a little, you know, alien rigmarole, and it's not really grand, it's not really a spectacle like a movie should be. But on the other hand, it does what Undiscovered Country couldn't do and just makes a nice little adventure with these characters you know and love. So if you love TNG, you should like Insurrection. There's no reason why you shouldn't like Insurrection. It's pretty okay. It's pretty fine and dandy. It does everything you could ask from a TNG movie. Except the other ones. This is the worst of the TNG movies, but decent. Mediocre. At 5, we have The Voyage Home.
Are you a doctor?
I kind of debated whether to put this over Insurrection. I don't like The Voyage Home, but it is the best of the post-Wrath of Khan Star Trek movies in that it's just a self-contained little adventure. The writing is decent because it's Leonard Nimoy, and he's a pretty okay as far as plot goes. The plot is stupid, but, you know, it's more well-written than Final Frontier or Undiscovered Country. And I don't really like the plot. It's the one where they save the whales. It feels very preachy, sentimental. It's just nonsense. Like, there's this probe that can only communicate with whales, but oh no, the whales are extinct. The whales are extinct in the future. That Star Trek is in, which doesn't even make any sense, because, like, you know, Earth in Star Trek is for the most part depicted as a utopia. You'd think that, you know, there'd be like conservationists and shit on Earth, you know, in the Star Trek universe, but nope, somehow, you know, all the whales are extinct, so we've got to get these whales from the past, bring them to the future, and so, you know, we can communicate with this probe that's going to destroy Earth if it can't talk to the fucking whales. Such a goofy premise. I don't like this movie mainly just because the plot is unoriginal. It's like the fourth time that the original series cast time travels back to the 20th century, and they act like it's the first time they've ever traveled back to the 20th century. Like, they respond to the 80s like they haven't already been to the 60s twice and the 20s once. And it's like, the 80s aren't that different from the 60s. You can handle the 80s. You've been here like a bunch of times before. Time travel is nothing new to you. And, you know, it's just a boring premise that's been done before. Also, I think I already mentioned this, but that point where, like, I forget who it is, Scotty and McCoy are, like, in the office of, like, the inventor of plexiglass or whatever, and they're like, you gotta help us invent plexiglass, and then like, Scotty shows them exactly how to design it, which is obviously, you know, a huge violation of the Prime Directive to, like, just interfere in how time in history goes, to just, like, reveal the secrets to this future technology years and years before it's supposed to exist. And then Scotty's like, well, how do we know he didn't invent the thing? And it's like, well, you just showed him how to invent it, so clearly he didn't know how to invent it before. So you've interfered with history, but it tries to like justify that in a way that obviously doesn't understand how time travel works, just like fundamentally. Unless what they're implying is that like Scotty and McCoy being there is a self-fulfilling loop, but I really doubt this movie is smart enough to implement a mechanism like that, let alone well or correctly. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I've already said that. That's just like something I feel like it's totally out of character for these characters to do. The Voyage Home is not a good movie by any means, and I actually wouldn't recommend it, even though I put it over Insurrection. I do feel like it's the best of the original series movies, except for one, which you'll notice I haven't mentioned yet. We'll get to that. But yeah, mainly just because it's self-contained, it's after all the con shit, and it's before all the stupid shit in Final Frontier and Undiscovered Country, so it feels like the series is just able to breathe for a little bit, but at the same time it's extremely dated. The thing about the whales is stupid, and yeah, it's just pretty dumb all around. I don't like The Voyage Home, but you could give it a watch and maybe you'll like it. Okay, now we get into the realm of like legitimately good movies, which is weird, again, that there are no like just like kind of mediocre Star Trek movies. I guess the only one that's like just kind of okay is Insurrection. Like all the other ones I can actually say like this is not worth watching, or this is really, really, really worth your time and you should absolutely watch it if you're into Star Trek. It's weird. Very few franchises are like as divided as that between like the really great ones, the really solid ones, and just like total crap, like Star Trek is. But at 4 we got Nemesis.
There is so much we need to talk about.
I would be interested to know what we're talking about.
Nemesis is fucking awesome. It's like if the Wrath of Khan was actually good, because Shinzon, unlike Khan, is an antagonist who's actually related, literally, to the protagonist, Captain Picard. It's a wonderful character study of Captain Picard, how he would respond to being unconsensually cloned, and Shinzon is such a fucking great villain. It's like, you know, he's lived this horrible life as this genetic freak. This movie is also such a wonderful movie in that it explores the Romulans, finally. After so much Klingon stuff, we finally get a movie about the Romulans, and that's so cool. I miss the Romulans. They were the coolest in the original series, and this movie goes back to them and does them justice. There's that female Romulan character in this. I really like her. She's great. And then Shinzon is just like such a fucking great villain. He's so cool. And when he comes out the shadows and he's like, oh, Captain Picard. And you can just get like this instant sense of malice off him. It's fucking amazing. Nemesis is great. Argo is great. That car they drive, that's fucking cool. What a cool ass addition to Star Trek. The whole chase scene at the beginning, oh my gosh, absolutely spectacular. The opening on Romulus where the entire Romulan Senate just gets turned into dust and you're like, oh my gosh, there's a threat here. Holy shit. The CGI is used sparingly, but where it's good, damn, it comes across pretty freaking well. And I also like how in this movie, especially when they're flying through the neutral zone, one thing that this movie does really well, which I seriously appreciate, and I don't feel is done at all to the same extent in other Star Trek movies, mainly just because it'd be technically difficult, is it shows like the three-dimensionality of space as Shinzon's ship is chasing down the Enterprise, and like you get to see like how it's not just up and down, it's not just like pure gravity. With these ships, you know, they're like twirling in 3 separate dimensions, just like going around each other in all these head-twisting combinations. So yeah, the choreography between the ships is just like so fucking cool. As the last movie with the Next Generation cast, this movie also provides closure for these characters who are great and really well developed. Riker and Troy are finally married, and Data fucking dies, which might feel like a tacky rehash of Wrath of Khan if you're a stupid Wrath of Khan fan, But Data's sacrifice actually feels touching and meaningful because, for all we know, Data stays fucking dead. There's not a search for Data after this. They don't bring him back. True, it's implied that his consciousness was sort of transferred over into B4, but it's just hinted at. And there's no guarantee that B4 will ever become like a fully operational Data, or even if he does, will ever replace what Data meant to the crew of the Enterprise. And I think that's such a great writing. It's so good. The sacrifice that Data makes to save Picard and to save the Enterprise so that Shinzon's ship blows up, because Shinzon is just that formidable of an opponent that Data feels that there's no other possible option, no other solution than to sacrifice himself. It's fucking amazing. And B4 is great. I think it's a little goofy that there's a third Data brother now, in addition to Data and Lore. And B4 doesn't look young, you know. Brent Spiner's getting kind of old at this point, and he doesn't look young like how, you know, an earlier sibling of Data and Lore would look. But I do like the addition of a third Data who's just kind of this malformed little shit and just makes a bunch of just random comments throughout the movie, and he's a nice little comic relief. One thing that you will feel throughout Nemesis is just like this sense of dread, this taut, frenetic suspense, and it's just like fucking gripping. It's just a fucking thrill ride, the entire thing. And of course I also just have a really personal connection to Nemesis in that it's the only good Star Trek movie released during my lifetime. It came out in 2003 when I was 1. Damn, I wish I had just gone to see this in the theater at 1 year old, but at least one good Star Trek movie existed during my lifetime, I can say that, and so, you know, that's kind of fucking cool. There was going to be another movie with Next Generation after Nemesis, but I feel like Nemesis is a perfect send-off to the Next Generation cast, and is a much better finale to Next Generation than the actual Next Generation finale. There are some people who actually don't like the Next Generation movies. Of course, they love the original series movies, which aren't even that good, except for one, which I'll get to in a moment. They just hate the Next Generation movies. They're like, oh, it should have just ended where the TV show ended. But I think that's fucking stupid, because the Next Generation movies had so much more depth and layers to these characters, and actually, like, put them in cool-ass situations, and Nemesis does not disappoint as a send-off to these characters. It is absolutely a wonderful conclusion to one of the best sequels of all time. You know, Next Generation is like a sequel, and damn, you know, proved itself with Nemesis. What a wonderful, wonderful movie. Watch Nemesis. At 3, we got First Contact.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
First Contact is better than Nemesis. It's actually the third best Star Trek movie. I'ma come right out and say it. It's so good. It develops the Borg. It examines Picard's like PTSD after becoming Locutus. And I remember seeing this on VHS when I was like 5 or something. Seeing the Borg Queen. Pure nightmare fuel. That shit was scary. I remember this movie as being way scarier than it actually is. I might actually argue Nemesis is scarier. But First Contact, for what it's worth, balances out the fear of the Borg with a pretty hopeful, nice message about, you know, Zefram Cochrane's flight and what that means to humanity. The bit with the Vulcans at the end is so inspiring, and every time these characters are able to fight back against the Borg just a little, get rid of that onslaught, like that point where they're able to stop the Borg from sending out a transmission to their brethren in space with the diabolical Borg antenna, you go, yes, they fucked those Borg up. Those Borg won't try anything now. Worf's awesome. Freaking how Data fights the Borg, or Data's almost like turned into a Borg. And I think that how the movie examines like Data's relationship to the Borg Queen, because he's also kind of a machine. You know, that's an interesting examination of how like he's kind of tempted. But he only pretends to be tempted. He's actually fighting for fucking Starfleet. You know, Barclay's in this. Barclay gets a cameo, and you know, Geordi and Troy. The whole it's wonderful. It's a wonderful movie. The only thing I don't like is how Zefram Cochrane is not the original Zefram Cochrane from Metamorphosis from TOS, and he's a totally different guy. And it gives off just kind of a whole different vibe. Like, I know that's the point, is that these characters learn that, like, Zefram Cochrane is different from how they were taught about in the history books, and they have to help him become the legend that he's been painted as over time. I feel like the actor isn't as good. You know, I keep having mixed feelings about that. Like, is it okay that they got this new fake Zefram Cochrane in? And, you know, it's okay. I mean, the story works. The story works extremely well. And this movie also makes use of an underutilized period in Star Trek's history, that being the late 21st century, when Vulcans and humans make first contact. I think that's cool. I think it's a good fucking movie. It does the Borg justice. It does Zefram Cochrane justice enough. I mean, the character arc is good, even if the actor isn't so good. I think it does Picard just an amazing range of emotions. He's like torn between, you know, he wants to fight the Borg, but he also doesn't want to lose his humanity, because losing his humanity is what makes him become the Borg. So it's just like this wonderful character study, and everyone's like, oh, that bit with Dixon Hill in the holodeck, what stupid fan service. It's like, it's fucking awesome. Dixon Hill on the big screen, the fucking club, you know, that offers a nice little break from the action on board the Enterprise to have them go in the holodeck and the Borg come in and, like, interact with this lavish set piece that's way more exorbitant than anything that ever could have been done on the show. Where, like, you know, you got this whole ass festering crime syndicate out here, and the Borg come in, and then Picard just takes out the machine gun. Boom, 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 boom. I'm autistic, so maybe I just appreciate things about these movies that other people aren't able to appreciate. That's fucking awesome. There's nothing more awesome than Picard with a fucking machine gun. Boom, boom, boom. Just taking care of this Borg scum. Rat-a-tat-a-tat. You know, that's fucking awesome. That's what Star Trek should be all about. Alright, at number 2... this shouldn't be a surprise. If you've seen my video all about it, I made an entire video about it because it's probably one of the most underrated sci-fi movies of all time, and the second best Star Trek movie, hands down, Generations. Generations, in many ways, does what The Undiscovered Country, now that I think about it, was unable to do, creating a great bridge between the original series and Next Generation by having both Kirk and Picard in one movie, doing awesome shit together. What more could you possibly ask for? Like, Undiscovered Country kind of tries to make the connection by having Worf's grandpa in there, and they say at the end, like, oh, there'll be another Enterprise in the future, but at the end of the day, it's just 100 so years before Next Generation, so you still feel like Kirk and Picard are, like, so separated. They're in such different circumstances. They're totally different places and times, and there's no real connecting fiber between the two series until fucking Generations comes along and fucking just does amazing shit with these two characters that has never been topped before or since. It is one of the greatest crossovers of all time. Not only do we get Kirk, we get a little cameo from Chekhov and Scotty in the opening scene, and they feel like their captain's dead, and then you feel like, wow, you know, Captain Kirk will never die. He does die. It's actually a satisfying death with a satisfying payoff, and you feel like, oh shit, Captain Kirk actually did die, but he died doing what he loved, kicking ass and saving the fucking universe, because he's Captain James T. Kirk. And if there's one way that he should have gone out, it's with fucking Captain Jean-Luc Picard, the two coolest fucking captains ever, and they're just taking it to Malcolm McDowell. And Malcolm McDowell's in this, and he's a fucking amazing villain. I actually like Soren more than Shinzon in Nemesis. How could I forget? Soren's fucking amazing. The evil Elorian with the diabolical plot to blow up the fucking sun. Has there ever been anything more awesome than that? We'll get to something a little more awesome than that in just a moment, but, like, seriously, this is what Star Trek should be all about. And he's not even trying to destroy Earth or anything. It's just some random planet. The fact that Picard is willing to go to all this trouble just to stop this crazed scientist from destroying an entire planet. It just goes to show, like, how principled Picard is, how much effort he's willing to go to stop this genocide, even though it's not his own planet. He goes to meet Kirk, and Kirk's just, like, chopping logs. It's fucking awesome. William Shatner has so much to do in this. It's so much fun, and you just get the idea, like, oh my gosh, this is so fucking awesome right here. Everything about Generations is perfect. Oh yeah, the fucking Klingon sisters are in this too. And it gives a satisfying conclusion to their character arc. You know, they start out as bastards, and then they just die as bastards. Wonderful secondary antagonists, and every set piece, every fucking line of dialogue in this is just a fucking gem. Man, just what a fucking amazing movie. I am amazed at how many people do not say that Generations is, like, one of the best science fiction movies of all time, but it's just that fucking good, and it's a wonderful connective tissue between original series and Next Generation. It is great. It is phenomenal. I love the Nexus. Whoopi Goldberg's great in it, and Spot's in it. Great fucking movie. Watch Generations. Fucking top tier Star Trek. Everything Star Trek should be. Okay, final pick. The best Star Trek movie. You know what it is, because I haven't mentioned it up until now, and it's pretty obvious if you know my opinions on Star Trek. The motion picture.
Decker, you don't know what that'll do to you. Yes, I do, Doctor.
The best Star Trek movie. This is the only movie with the original cast that I would actually recommend. It's before the Wrath of Khan just sends the entire franchise down the shitter until Generations recovers it. And the motion picture is a fucking groundbreaking movie. It's a fucking landmark in cinema, and it's one of the best science fiction movies ever made. Above Generations, I would argue. Because whereas Generations has a lot of fan service and a really great script, really boffo fucking acting from everyone involved, Star Trek the Motion Picture, bizarrely enough, does what no other Star Trek movie is capable of. Perfectly communicating the thesis statement of fucking Star Trek, which is just to boldly go where no man has gone before. Star Trek the Motion Picture works because it just does what made the original series so great and so beloved, but on the big screen, as a movie. And it also does what The Final Frontier was trying to do with this big transcendental experience, but does it way fucking better and way cooler. The special effects used to create V'ger are so fucking awesome. Some of the best special effects I've ever fucking seen in any movie. Just the design of V'ger. Holy shit. This movie also features, of course, the first Klingons with the Klingon music, and Klingons that really feel like Klingons, as opposed to in the original series where, you know, they don't have the ridges and everything. In the opening scene to this, you really feel like, yeah, these are Klingons here in the motion picture. Came out in 1979, so same year as Alien, 2 years after Star Wars. It's the only, like, 70s Star Trek thing, actually. The entire 70s for Star Trek was kind of the dark age of Star Trek, except the animated series, which is, like, mega fucking underrated and well worth a watch. But the motion picture, holy shit, this is Star Trek right here. This does everything I would expect a Star Trek movie to do. The motion picture is fascinating because it captures what makes Star Trek great. It's the original crew doing discovery and exploration, which is the point of Star Trek, is to find new things out about the universe, and V'ger is such a fucking interesting thing to explore. Also, that sequence when they go through the fucking wormhole and, like, their faces are distorted, this is way before DS9, and before wormholes became, like, a commonplace thing. And as much as I like the wormhole in DS9, I can't deny that the practical effects used to stretch everyone's face is all wonky, and like the amazement that comes from their first exposure to a wormhole in the motion picture, it's just fucking amazing. And this movie is so, like, intense. The build-up where Spock's on Vulcan in, like, exile, and he's, like, this religious, convert, and he's at, like, the big Vulcan temple, and then McCoy has a beard, and he's all bitter and jaded, but still just exactly like how McCoy should be. And, Kirk is gathering everything together, and then he's on the shuttle with Scotty, and they go in and they look at the Enterprise, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's the Enterprise, back in action, and the crew is gonna get back together for a series of fun adventures. And that never panned out, because then the Wrath of Khan happened, and it just became this boring, repetitive slog. But the motion picture is so good, and stands so well on its own, that you can easily excuse Star Treks 2 through 6 for that, because, like, Star Trek 1 is all you could ever possibly need. Gene Roddenberry's heavy involvement and Jerry Goldsmith's fantastic fucking score, especially the V'ger theme. And I especially like the bit where they're passing by the gallery of all the previous ships called Enterprise, the new guy Decker and the bald lady, and they go through, like, the chronological pictures of all the ships that were called Enterprise, and the boat is there, and the space shuttle is there, and the satellite-looking one, and then the original from the original series. But notably, Captain Archer's one isn't there, because Enterprise isn't fucking canon. And this scene in the motion picture just kind of proves that Enterprise is a load of horse shit, and is just fucking stupid. But I really like that, how this one scene, like, incidentally reveals just, like, how fucking non-canonical everything in Enterprise is. God, I fucking hate Enterprise. I've made an entire video about why Enterprise is so shit. So much fucking chemistry in the motion picture, and it feels like so much gravitas goes into it. And it's a real shame that most people don't watch the motion picture or consider it the best Star Trek movie, considering that it is, like, hands down, non-negotiably the best Star Trek movie, in that it perfectly captures what Star Trek is, and like the essential vibe of Star Trek, like down to a T. And some people just skip right to Wrath of Khan, which again is like watching The Rage Carrie 2 before you watch Carrie. You're just like shooting yourself in the fucking foot there. Just toss Wrath of Khan in the dumpster. Watch the motion picture. Way fucking better movie. I would go so far as to say that the motion picture sets the bar for Star Trek movies so impossibly high that even if the sequel hadn't been a complete disappointment like Wrath of Khan, nothing could have possibly hoped to top or match or exceed this. The motion picture is a cinematic achievement. I've had a lot of petty arguments online with people who insist that the motion picture didn't succeed because it was trying to be like 2001. And I just have to ask, like, how the fuck is the motion picture anything like 2001? Unless you have a very limited understanding of what the motion picture is, V'ger and the Stargate sequence have nothing in common. They're both very cool, trippy sequences, but what they're trying to say about man's place in the universe and our relationship with the universe are completely different. 2001 is much more bleak and nihilistic. Star Trek the Motion Picture is an optimistic portrait of space exploration, which is ultimately what Star Trek is all about. It's a fundamentally optimistic science fiction series that does not contain that bleak Kubrickian nihilism and is not trying to. Star Trek the Motion Picture is not supposed to be like 2001: A Space Odyssey. You can accuse it of trying to be like that, but that's just not what it is. And some people say it wasn't popular because people were expecting for it to be like Star Wars, which came out 2 years earlier. But again, I don't think it was ever supposed to be like Star Wars, and it would be stupid if it tried to be like Star Wars, because fundamentally Star Trek and Star Wars are two entirely different franchises, and I don't think Star Trek the Motion Picture would fucking work if it tried to just cop the feel of Star Wars. Star Trek the Motion Picture, and you have to keep this in mind when you're watching it, it is not 2001, it is not Star Wars, it is its own separate fucking thing. It is the Star Trek movie. It is the definitive Star Trek movie. It is the movie that eloquently and perfectly captures the spirit of Star Trek in every conceivable sense. And in that regard, it's the best Star Trek movie. But really, the only reason it didn't succeed, and this is pretty fucking obvious, is because it came out the same year as Empire Strikes Back. So, while Star Trek is, in my opinion, the better franchise between the two, Star Trek kicks Star Wars ass any day of the week, Star Wars, being a movie franchise, is just better at being a movie franchise, and Star Trek, even if Star Trek the motion picture, I would argue, is better than A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, just in terms of characters, in terms of depth, in terms of narrative and conceptual complexity. Star Trek the motion and picture did not stand a chance after the blockbuster lines for Star Wars, after the cultural sensation that is Star Wars. Star Trek the motion picture just was not going to be as successful as fucking Star Wars, and that's okay. All that matters is that it exists in some capacity in the form that we now have it, and it's fucking awesome in that capacity, and it does everything you could possibly ask a Star Trek movie to do. Now, do I think it's fair that Star Wars stole Star Trek's thunder, and Star Trek could potentially have been a massive success on the big screen if Star Wars hadn't gotten it first and beat them to the punch? Yeah. In an alternate universe where Star Wars never came out, Star Trek probably would still be the dominant one of the two. Or if Star Trek the motion picture just came out in like 1975 and then Star Wars came out, Star Trek would probably be a lot more relevant. And also, the Star Trek sequels would probably be better, and they wouldn't fall into this desperate attempt to, like, up the stakes with every successive movie and just get crazier and shittier ideas with each fucking one, with Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and Voyage Home, Final Frontier, and Undiscovered Country. All that could have been avoided if there was just a Star Trek movie a little sooner. Now, the development of Star Trek the motion picture in and of itself is a fascinating history. Originally, there was going to be a series called Star Trek Phase 2 with the original series cast, instead of Next Generation. But then they were like, we're just going to make it a movie. But then they were like, we're going to make a sequel series also with brand new characters and all that. So, the development history of Star Trek is just like really fucking interesting in addition to being very messy, and it doesn't have the concise planning that Star Wars obviously did from the beginning with George Lucas at the helm. Star Trek, by contrast, is a lot more kind of spur of the moment and sporadic. I like that about it because that allows ideas like V'ger to come to the forefront, and when it works, it really fucking works. When writers come up with great concepts like V'ger, that are just like so fucking cool to watch and so fucking interesting, just absolutely amazing science fiction ensues. You need great ideas to make great science fiction, and that's what Star Trek the motion picture is. It's a wonderful idea based on a wonderful fucking show, executed near perfectly. It's a great adaptation of everything that made the original series great onto the big screen. So you should watch the motion picture, fuck the Wrath of Khan, and half the Star Trek movies, mostly the ones with the original series cast, aren't worth watching. But the motion picture absolutely is fucking worth watching, and it's a great, great movie. Highly, highly recommended. I cannot recommend it enough. And it's fucking underrated. It's time it gets its due fucking credit. You know, that's as I see it. It's high time for its hour to come, because it's fucking brilliant. Anyway, there you have it. My definitive list of Star Trek movies, from the worst all the way to the best. I've mentioned some of these before, but here's the comprehensive list once and for all. This is as I see it, from the worst up until that shining pinnacle that only Star Trek can set. So, let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm sure there's lots of Wrath of Khan fans who want to tell me how wrong and stupid I am. So go and do that in the little comments jungle gym. You little morons, huh? Yeah. Go tell me how great Wrath of Khan is, okay? Yeah. What a wacky notion. I mean, and people wonder why Star Trek isn't as popular as Star Wars when, like, most of the fan base prefers the blatantly inferior movie. Anyway, yeah, that's all I have to say for today. Here from the sci-fi porch in the outer reaches of space, this is Nick Cicada, signing off. Sayonara, suckers. Live long and prosper and all that jazz. And I'll see you in the next time. Or the naked time. Or whatever.